This is Stephen Kotler, and you're listening to Your Superior Self.
Hi, I'm Anita Murjani, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hello, this is Dr. Raymond Moody, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, Cultural Creatives. I'm Bruce Lipton, and I'm here to join you with Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Paul Selig, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm Trey Downs, and you're listening to Your Superior Self podcast, a show that helps you remember the greatness that lies inside of you. Yes, the greatness that is inside of you, that is your being. And to help us realize that greatness and to remember that and become more conscious of the moment, I have Dr. Kathryn Ford joining the show. Dr. Ford helps couples to stay open to each other by cultivating present moment awareness, especially Aperture Awareness, which is the felt sensation of availability for connection. Both her clinical work and her writing integrate neuropsychology, mindfulness, and multiple therapy modalities. She received her MD from Brown Medical School and completed her psychiatric residency at Stanford School of Medicine. In addition to her traditional training, her lifelong meditation practice has informed both her life and her work. Training with teachers at Barr Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts and Spirit Rock Meditation Center in California has helped her to understand the critical importance of mindfulness in couples' relationships and to develop present moment aperture awareness. Raising awareness, that is always a good thing, especially in relationships with our significant others. It's tough because I'm recently doing a study right now in school of the types of love and how that relates to longevity, length of time in a relationship. And a lot of the time, a lot of the literature, a lot of the research shows that passion decreases over time and a new love takes place. More so related to intimacy and commitment. And a lot of us don't understand why or what that transition looks like, but it shows in the research. And I think it has to do with our conscious awareness in our relationships, that transition from that passionate, that almost infatuous type of love to a more understanding of what that person is, the being of that person. That transition, we never see it because we're so lost in the moment. And we lose that moment over time. Life takes a hold of us, life situations, kids, marriage, work, and we lose the moment. So that passion escapes us because we're not in it. And then a new love takes place, which is more rooted in commitment and intimacy. How do we get back to that passion? I think we get back to that by being in the moment and working towards that. Relationships are work. It is not something that you just get in and ride the wave. You're going to identify things in your partner that sometimes don't make sense, or maybe even your own development in life. You're raising your consciousness, your awareness, you're raising your personal bar, and you change. And so now your partner is looking at you. Why have you changed? And that's a fact of life. Life is ever going change. Change happens all the time. And so when we connect in the moment, we can meet on level playing fields and we can communicate what it is that we're experiencing, our subjective reality, a little bit more clearly to that individual, to our partners, and we can become more supportive of one another, one of each other. We can become more supportive. We can open those lines of communication. We can receive each other, be more open to our relationship. Because at the end of the day, that's how you become stronger, is through these experiences. It's not some type of story. It's not some type of belief that if you just be with someone, that love will develop. It's not true. It is, you have to work hard at a relationship, because in that experience of working towards something together, you develop feelings, you develop consciousness that is shared amongst each other, and you share information together, you share data, you share experience, you share emotions, you share consciousness. And that is when love becomes both of you. That is when love melds itself in the two. The two become one in that moment. Yeah, it's tough. It's hard. It's hard work. It's like meditation. You have to keep practicing. You have to keep sitting. You have to keep working. You have to keep communicating. Real relationships are built on tough conversations, are built on connection, are built on your willingness to open your heart to your partner and to allow constructive criticism to be passed to you, and for you not to judge it, for you to allow it, to feel it, to understand someone else's perception of you without judgment. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Ford. And to give you a little bit of a preview, here's her speaking about these subjects.
Over time, though, if your willingness to not give up and to not get overly discouraged by getting the hand, it's like, okay, so your partner's entitled to have their skepticism. Maybe they're a little untrusting because you have been going through a hard time. The way you gain that trust back is to consistently be showing up in the place of, I want a better relationship with you. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Here's some things I've been thinking about. I heard this talk by Kathryn Ford the other day, and she was talking about being in the present moment and paying attention to openness. I'd really like to talk to you about that when it's the right time. That's the other thing, is allow your partner to pick the time. So instead of just springing it on her, like someday after dinner, you say, tonight we're going to talk about open apertures, right? Instead, you say, I heard this talk the other day about relationships. And there were a couple ideas in there I'd like to discuss with you. Why don't you let me know when you'd be open to that? Or are you open to that? And she might say, well, maybe, but not now. And then you might say, yeah, I get that, not now. How about this Sunday we'll go for a walk and maybe we can talk about it then. Allow your partner to have some time to get used to the idea that you're going to introduce something new. We don't like things being sprung on us, even when they turn out to be good things. It's a little bit alarming. So, and especially when, partners should be having good ideas about the relationship. They should be thinking proactively about what would help us. How could we get to the next place where we're even better couple?
I love it. I love all of it. If you guys want to find out more about Dr. Ford, you can visit her website at kathrynfordmd.com. All of her services are over there. All of her information. If you want to contact her, you can do that as well. I'm excited about this conversation. So without further ado, here is my conversation with the great and the powerful Dr. Kathryn Ford.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Ford, and this is Your Superior Self.
Kathryn Ford, such a very strong name. Thank you so much for joining the show. I can't wait to talk about what you're about.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So why don't you give everybody some background? You're very into helping couples, and what makes you qualified to do that?
Okay. Qualified to do that. I come to that via kind of an unusual route. Most people that do couples therapy get there through becoming a marriage and family counselor or sometimes a psychologist. I actually traveled through the avenue of medical school. I was a psychology major in college, liked it a lot, was pretty sure I was going to end up being a therapist. But more and more psychology was starting to include courses like neurobiology, psychophysiology. And for me, that sounded just about right in terms of trying to put the whole person together and understand the physiologic basis of what goes on in our minds. And indeed, that has, in the last couple of decades, just exploded into a fascinating wealth of neuroscience that is pretty exciting.
I love neuroscience. So what was it about couples, though, that kind of you wanted to go into that
Yeah.
modality?
Yeah. Sometimes I think of it as working with couples and being interested in and learning about relationships was sort of the ideal marriage of I'm pretty romantic and I'm also very practical. And so this was a place where my romantic side and my practical side thoroughly agreed that the most interesting thing to do, and maybe the thing that I felt I could be the most helpful with, was to learn about and help people with their relationships. I was pretty convinced that our relationships determine a whole lot of our happiness in life. And indeed, the science that subsequently has come out, every time I turn a new page, there's more about the ways that really we're not independent human beings. We're, as Tony Kushner, the playwright, said, the smallest human unit is two. And I really see that and believe that. So it's a very exciting place to be. I think the other aspect of it is that I realize that I kind of like to put myself where the learning is. And as far as I'm concerned, part of why being a couple is really hard is it's a really intensive learning journey. And it is for couples and it is for me working with couples. And that makes it pretty interesting.
Mm. Where do I want to go with this? There's so many places I want to go. Does it matter? Like, do you work with just married, or is it the people that have been in just like they're not married at all? Like maybe they're engaged, or maybe they've just been together for like 15 years. Like, does it matter if they're married or not?
To me, it doesn't. I work with relationships. In fact, sometimes I work with relationships between parents and adult children. I also work with professional relationships. So everything that I do really is about two people, or sometimes more than two people, connecting. And what I've tried to specialize in and train myself to do well is understanding how it is that people connect, and also what gets in the way of that. And when people walk through my door, one way to think of it is they're coming to me because something has gotten in the way of connecting. If you think about it, people really want to connect with each other. It's rare that you meet someone that really doesn't want to connect with anybody at all. And we're kind of driven in that direction, and yet things get in the way. Things get in the way in our workplace relationships, but especially once we have the level of commitment that makes us a couple, things get in the way. I work with people that are just starting to be a couple. I think increasingly, the younger generations are more and more savvy about the idea that you don't have to be in serious trouble. You don't have to wait till the water level's up to here to learn something about being a couple. And sometimes I think of my work as sort of like a piano teacher. A lot of people can teach themselves to play the piano by themselves. But if you get a teacher for a while, it makes it less painful and a little bit faster. So I work with people that are just starting to form a relationship and are kind of thinking maybe they're going to make this a more permanent thing, and they want to check out some things about that. People that are solidly married, people that aren't certain they want to be married anymore, people that are a couple and not married. And I also work with people that are in the process of trying to separate from being a couple and want to do that in a way that leaves them both feeling healthy and whole on the other side of that. So all of it.
So is there a commonality in, like, let's say husband and wife as, I don't know, brother and sister or father and daughter? Like, you're a relationship therapist, right? Like, so I guess not all relationships are the same, but are there some commonalities in that?
You mean between the different kinds of relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a while ago, what I started to figure out, when you're in school to learn psychology, or in my case, psychiatry, you learn a lot of models and you learn a lot of theoretical ideas about how to think about things. And some of that has to do with how to think about people's past and their other former experiences, et cetera. I got to a point that I realized there was something else that I was paying attention to that was helping me kind of simplify what's actually a pretty complex territory, which is the territory of relationships. And I realized I was watching couples, and what I was watching for was, are they connecting or not? And if not, what can I do to clear the path? Sometimes I kind of see it like a road with boulders, and I'm the person coming along to help get the boulders out of the way. But what I started to realize, people came into me in pain because they really did want to connect. These were sincere people that really wanted this to work. They really want to be with each other, whatever the relationship is. And something's getting in the way of them connecting. And of course, when that happens, as we all know, we get very frustrated, we get very sad, we get very angry, we get very frightened sometimes. And that's what we have in common across all relationships is something gets in the way of connecting. And I began to realize that there's something we can tune into that I think of as aperture, an emotional aperture, that has to do with how open are you at this point to listening to me? How open am I to listening to you? What are the openings between us like? And so I really started to tune into that and help people themselves to tune into, are you open right now? And if not, what's getting in the way?
So what is that aperture awareness, right? Like I think I was reading your bio and there was some stuff in there about meditation and mindfulness. Like, what is that really? What is that really?
So let's start with the neurological ideas about it. What aperture awareness really is that human beings have a giant portion of their brain and their attention devoted to having a sensation of how they're doing in their connection with another person, of whether or not they're open. So I can feel whether or not I'm open. If you think about it, you can just quickly ask yourself, so am I open or closed right now? And probably you get a sense of what that is. I often encourage people to think of it on a 1 to 10 scale, not just am I open or closed, but if 5 is kind of the midpoint and kind of medium open, 10 is very open, 1 is very closed. And very quickly, people can start to work with, yeah, I'm sort of open, maybe a 5.5, or no, I'm wide open, I'm good to go, I'm 9, 10. So that's what aperture awareness is that. And we're wired neurologically with our limbic systems to sense where other human beings are. It turns out that the most important part of our survival, or now for sure, and maybe even back when we were running from the tigers and chasing the tigers, has to do with, are we able to tell what's going on with the other people around us? Do we know when the other people around us are in pain? Do we know when they're angry and maybe we need to stay away a little bit? So we're very well equipped to sense that. When I first hit on this idea of aperture, I remember that day in my office, I was thinking, oh, I get it now. I'm supposed to teach people to sense apertures, to have aperture awareness. And that lasted for about 2 or 3 days. And there was a session soon after that where I was watching a couple and she was talking faster and faster and he was starting to shut down. And the more he shut down, the faster she talked, the louder she talked. She starts to repeat herself and she's really going at it. And he's getting more and more and more close. So I turned to her and I said, what's going on right now? And she said, well, he's just closing down. And I said, right. I said, so why did you keep talking? And she said, I didn't know what else to do. And that was when I thought, it's not about teaching people to have aperture awareness. We're already hardwired to do that. That's something we naturally know how to do. We don't pay attention to it. We may not even know we know how to do it because often we don't know what to do with that information. And all of our senses, if you think about it, developed because there's something we can do with that information, our sight, our hearing, our sense of touch. And aperture awareness is just like that. Think of it like your visual sensation. When you look at something, you don't analyze every photon that's coming in and hitting your retina in order to know what you're seeing. You look at something and like that, you see it. Aperture awareness is like that. You can't figure it out. And in fact, trying to figure it out gets in the way. It's a sensation that's just already in there. And the more you know what to do with it, the more developed it becomes.
I love all of that. How do you, and I'm sure you get these, I'm looking at some of the questions you sent me and I'm like, man, these are like some $1 million questions, like the honeymoon effect, right? Like you have this, you get into a relationship, you like hanging out with them, you like being around them, you see all the positives, but then couple months later, 6 months later, here you are, you're sitting next to someone who is showing some of their,
Right.
I don't know, anxieties, I don't know, whatever else they have along with them. Like, what happens after the honeymoon? Like, and why do some of the relationships fail?
You mean what's starting to change at that point? And
Yeah.
why are people starting to get a little nervous, or maybe a lot nervous?
Yeah.
The honeymoon phase, however long that lasts, and whether or not it takes us to an actual wedding or not, it's the phase where our endorphins are pumping. We've got a lot of adrenaline on board. We've got a lot of oxytocin on board. We've got a lot of dopamine on board, and we're kind of coasting on that. And it works very, very well to get us connected enough that we start to make a strong commitment and then a stronger commitment. At a certain point of commitment, something else kicks in, and it goes like this. When we decide, oh, I'm really going to be with you, I'm not just going to be with you, I'm going to be with you. That's a process of integration. It's sort of the same kind of process of integration that goes on when you look at a forest and you see how everything is connected and yet separate. Trees don't look like shrubs, and trees don't look like frogs, and frogs don't look like trees. And yet, as we've learned a lot about ecology, we realize all of those things are interwoven. When two people are trying to form a couple, they're trying to integrate in such a way that they remain completely autonomous and separate, and yet very, very connected. If you think about it, you're starting to depend on this other person for all kinds of things, including things out into the future, like having a family or making a big move across the country. And there's a lot resting on this. There's a lot riding on how successful you are. And people start to get nervous. And there are two things that really start to close people down. And oddly enough, they are both. People get nervous when they start to feel like they're losing the connection. And people also get nervous when they start to feel like they're losing their autonomy. And a good couple needs all of both of those things. So the honeymoon phase passes and people start to realize that it's actually pretty complicated to make one life together out of two very different individuals. And they start to bump up against all the things that happen when you come to differences and you don't know what to do with that. Part of the trick of being a couple or being a country or being a planet has to do with how do you deal with differences in a way that bring you more connection with less pain and fear. And we're constantly trying to optimize for that. And after the honeymoon is when people start to realize, oh, this is kind of a hard project. But they also start to realize, and I guess a different way to answer that question that I often think of is when people join their lives together, they get married or they make some other kind of commitment to each other, they have a grand vision of what this is going to be. In fact, people rarely get married with having some pretty high expectations about what this is going to be like. And soon thereafter, one of the things that happens when the honeymoon starts to end is they start to get disillusioned. Oh, it's not going to be that you're constantly understanding what I want and need. It's not going to be that you're thinking of me first. It's not going to be that we want the same things, that we always love going to the same movies. And they start to make a shift that I think is really unfortunate and doesn't help them, which is they decide to give up on the vision. And people walk in my office saying things like, well, we probably expected too much, or, we should probably just settle like all the other couples we know. That's not such a good road forward, because being a couple is a lot of hard work. And to do that hard work, you need a very grand, inspiring vision. It's just that there's one element left out of the vision that most people carry around with them, and that's the learning. So think of it this way. It's very different to have a vision of, wow, we're going to be together forever and we're going to be really understanding and caring with each other. That's a different vision and less realizable than what we're going to be as a couple learning to really care about each other and take care of each other and love each other. And so when you add the learning into whatever the vision is, and people's vision of these kinds of relationships is actually pretty similar. And the missing element is learning. And what hits them kind of from behind is they didn't realize that there was going to be this much learning. And at first, that's kind of intimidating.
Well, where can they go for this? Like, where can they go for the learning part, right? Like, what is it? Is it just buying like, not besides your book, right? But
Yeah.
like, what other areas or what other like literature should they be buying?
That's a really good question. One of the things about being a couple is that you don't know how to do it from watching other people. There's a whole lot of things we learn in life by watching other people do it. Being a couple, couples are sort of like a magic show. The good stuff is all hidden. And so you come along in life, and maybe the only couple you had a really clear view of in their relationship was your parents. And even then, often things are kept behind closed doors. So people don't have a chance to observe other couples going through hard times, working it out. Being a couple is one of the most closely guarded privacies we have. So part of what I would say is it would be a lot better if that weren't so. And one of the places to learn about being a couple is to start to gingerly move forward in your social circles with talking about relationships. Introduce the conversation at the next time you have dinner with another couple of, so what happens when you guys can't agree on what to have for dinner? And you can do it with a little humor, but you could share your stories. It makes you not feel so weird and off the charts that you're having so much trouble, because you start to realize all couples have trouble. So that's one thing I really encourage a lot, is be a little less secretive about what's going on in your couple, a little less shy about sharing those experiences with friends that are close and that with you, that you're already sharing, parts of your life that are fairly dear to you. Do that. Reading is a good place also, and I don't read just books about couples. I find a lot in poetry and novels. I read books about meditation. I read books about other people's spiritual practices. Basically, being a couple is about learning about life. And so read things about life, but also talk to other people about it and find people that you trust enough, either as a couple to talk to them, again, over dinner, or find people that you trust individually and, draw them out a little bit. We were having a talk the other night, my husband and I, and, it didn't go so well. Does that ever happen to you? And be a little less timid about sharing that ride.
You ever feel like you're bringing your work home?
Of course, my work is, I always say, really, when people say, where did you learn what you know? Yes, I read a lot of books. Yes, I did a lot of training, but really most of what I know that's really useful, I learned by being in a fairly challenging couple. So actually, it's not exactly that I'm bringing my work home. Home is where I do the hardest part of my work, and where I learn the lessons that I can then pass on to the couples I work with. Most of what happens in my office, I learned at home. I didn't learn in school. Mm-hmm. And that's the training ground for being a couple, is being in your couple in a way that you take risks at a level that allow you to learn. And again, you hear the emphasis on learning. This really is a very, one of the things we've learned from neuroscience recently is really contrary to what was thought to be true when I first went to medical school, which is that we have brains that are growing and developing for the first 5 years and maybe a little bit more when we hit adolescence. And then that's the set we've got. And from then on, it's all downhill. We're just losing neurons. But what we know now is that that's not at all the brain we've got. In fact, we have brains that are constantly changing right into the 8th and 9th decade. And so one of the paths that's a really strong learning path is being a couple. When people say, why is it so hard? It's so hard because this is the place in your major relationships that you're going to learn most of your adult learning about life and about relationship. That's what you're doing. When you see it that way, you realize we're not having troubles because there's something wrong with one of us. We're not having trouble because we made a bad choice in each other. We're having troubles because this is a hard piece of learning. This is a hard school that we've signed up for. And once you realize that and you start to dignify and actually respect all of those hard moments, then it changes it from something that you're bad at to something that you're good at, which is learning.
I heard you say this is a hard school we signed up for.
Yeah.
Are you referring to past lives or reincarnation or anything like that in that statement?
Not necessarily, although I do know that some people include past lives and reincarnation in the idea of learning. As far as I'm concerned, the jury's out for me on past lives and reincarnation. I'm not close to the idea, and I don't know yet what I think about that or what's true about that.
Well, you had some training in some like Buddhist meditation, right?
Yes, indeed. As you know, there are Buddhists that are very steeped in ideas about reincarnation, and other Buddhists that aren't. And so I'm a Buddhist.
Jury's out.
I'm a Buddhist that feels like the jury is out.
What do you think? Like, I'm just out of curiosity. What do you think after we transition? Like after the light goes out, what happens?
I'm very much, how can I put it? I don't believe in beliefs. I'm very wary of beliefs. So I have had a couple of experiences that I thought, that could very well relate to a past life or something like that. And I pay a lot of attention to those. But what I pay most attention to is my actual experience. I actually trust my own individual experience a lot. So therefore, I don't believe or disbelieve in past lives. And in fact, it's not that interesting to me to believe in them. What's more interesting is to stay very open and alert to my actual experiences as I'm living this life and see what they have to tell me about everything, including about past lives.
Sure. No, I love all of that. I find it so interesting when I have someone of your that has your resume and I hear like a hint of that or something like that I can, because a lot of psychologists scientists don't have that mindset. They have that Newtonian,
Right.
Mindset, causal and effect, right? You start talking about metaphysics and it's like their head spins around, right? Like you just don't go there. But it's very,
I don't like walls like that. I like open territory.
I love it. I love it too. I'm trying to be more conscious of the moment when I'm with my wife, right? Like being conscious of her needs, her communication, her body language. Sometimes I can be that idiot husband where she's throwing me different clues, different breadcrumbs, and I don't get the picture. And then we end up, she's upset because I'm not paying attention to what she's trying to communicate with me, which I wouldn't say all men, but I think majority of the people, it's not even about really men or women. I think it's just us being present in that moment and being open to, or even communicating properly. Right.
Right. Yes.
I mean, I just feel like it's hard because we're not in the moment as much, right? We have a lot of distractions, right? Especially with COVID. Everyone's on their devices. Everyone's, busy with what we're going to do, what the new work life is going to look like. Is it going to be in office? Is it going to be at home? What does that look like? How can I, as a husband, like be conscious of, how can I pick up more so on her cues? How can I be more conscious of, I guess, her needs? How can I, does it make sense? Like these questions, like I just feel like
no, I think these are good questions. These are the questions that most people who really care about their relationships and their partners ask themselves, like, how could I do that better? And that's one of the nice things about my work is I work with people that are very motivated to be together and to be a good guy or a good wife or whatever. This goes back to the aperture thing. I'm glad you mentioned present moment because I really do want to emphasize that. In a certain way, what I point myself at and what I think is the most important is to take present moment awareness and apply it to being in a relationship. Aperture awareness is simply a special type of present moment awareness. It's a part of mindfulness. It's mindfulness about a relationship. So what I would say is it's hard to be in the present moment, not only because of all these distractions and everything else we have going on, but, way, way back in human history, human beings learned to be in the there and then. We learned how to abstract about things that were not actually present right in front of us. And what happened was that conferred such a strong survival advantage that we got better and better and better at it. It helped us with all kinds of things to be able to think about things that weren't right in front of us. So we've become very specialized in thinking about things that aren't what we're with right now. Thus, the emphasis right now on mindfulness and why it is we have to sit on a cushion or take yoga classes or whatever we do to try to cultivate present moment awareness is because it really is kind of not our best, strongest suit right now. And we're really good at this other thing, but we're not really good at showing up in the present moment. So part of the answer to your question is do whatever you can find to train yourself in what's commonly known as mindfulness, in this ability to just pay attention right now. Sometimes I give people an exercise to the next time you're going to put on your socks, I want you to be completely in the activity of putting on your socks. As you reach into the drawer, notice the colors in the socks. Notice which sock you're going to put on. What do you like about those socks? How do they feel in your hands? And exercises like that, especially ones that are very sensory rich, help us to arrive right here, right now in the present moment. And where people go off track with their spouses is they're thinking about it too much. They're trying to figure out, well, now let's see, what does the latest psychology theory say about how I should be as a mate? What did I read, on Psychology Today recently that tells me how to do this? That can get in the way a lot because present moment awareness gets knocked out of the ballpark when we go to this kind of overthinking things. So really what we need to do is just don't think about it. Don't try to figure out what's going on. Just show up right now. Is this person open to me or closed? And then if you want her to be open, but she seems not to be, have the temerity to ask, gee, I was sort of hoping we were going to hang out. You don't seem that open right now. Can you say something about that? And she might say, oh no, actually, I'd love to hang out. I was just distracted because I was thinking about who was going to take the garbage out or something. So then you take the garbage out and then you're good to go, right? Or she might say to herself, she's probably saying, wow, he really is tuned in. He really noticed. And then to you, she might say, well, actually, you're right. I am not that open because of what happened this morning. And you probably don't even know what happened this morning, right? So you say, really? What happened? And she says, that thing when you raced out of the house and you were late and you yelled at me over your shoulder to pick up my damn shoes. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, right. So she's been carrying that all day. You totally forgot about it. That's why she reads to you as kind of closed down. You might never have gotten a way to deal with that in the moment that night. You could have both grumpily gone off to bed and not had a little hangout time if you hadn't just noticed and asked. And just that act of noticing, asking is such a trust builder because what it says to your partner is, I see you, I'm paying attention, I care about whether you're open or closed, and I'm willing to take the risk of asking about it.
So having check-ins, right? Like,
yeah,
having check-ins that are you're 100% in the moment, conscious, and being there and open to receive. Like, because sometimes it like the ego, right? Like she'll say something. Just for an example, right? Like just saying something about, take the trash out, and that ego hits. Right. You feel that, you feel that defensiveness. Like, hey, I take out the trash, blah blah blah.
Right.
But being in the moment, present, open to maybe criticism, it may be love. But the thing is, I think the problem is the criticism for a lot of people. I know for myself, it's like you get that criticism, which is constructive. It's never like downward talking, but it's kind of like things that kind of, chip away at you. You're like, but then it's like, you got to remember it's the ego, like relax a little bit, like take yourself out of it and kind of understand that she's coming from a place, I guess, that has noticed this, that you're not doing something. I don't know. I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the ego when you're in a relationship where, she might be, you guys are trying to have a moment, be conscious in the moment, but she or he, I'm not just going to say she, but or he says something that kind of puts you on the defense? Like, how do you kind of like reel it back in?
Yeah, good question. One of my favorite things to teach people is this thing that I call riding the wave. Almost very often, if we hear something from our partner that puts us on edge, like, why didn't you take out the trash? Or the famous terrible 3 words, we have to talk. Instantly, what's going to happen is you're going to close down. You don't have the option not to have, that's your initial that's your amygdala signaling you, danger, danger, your partner is not happy with you. The instantaneous closing down is not where you have the power of choice. That's going to happen. Where you have choice is to delay responding until you can open back up. In other words, when information is coming into our brains, it goes through 2 circuits, the fast circuit and the slow circuit. The fast circuit is designed to make sure we don't get in any trouble. So that's that instant response of closing down. If you can just ride out the wave and wait for your second response, you may get to something that is less likely to cause this escalating pattern of both of you closing down. So your first response might be, are you kidding me? I always take out the trash. If you don't speak as your aperture is closing, that's a stop sign. You don't speak. You wait till it opens again, which usually only takes a few seconds if you're not in a really bad spiral. You wait till it opens again and you look for that second response, which might be something more like, whoa, I didn't know that I was forgetting to take out the trash. Is that what's going on? And then she might say, no, actually, you are taking it out. I just really want it taken out right now. And that was that sharp tone that you heard in her voice. So waiting for the second response, riding out the wave. And again, this comes to aperture awareness, paying attention to your own open or closed. And don't speak when you're closed, that's a stop sign. The art of learning to go on green and stop on red means everything in couples interactions.
How do you get people, or how do you get your spouse or your partner, how do you get them aligned with this? How do you, let's say you just read about this and you're trying to practice it for yourself. How do you get your partner on board with being in the moment? Right.
Well, that is a big question. Let me think about that,
because there could be resistance in the change, right? Like we were talking about, we're creatures of habit, right? So I'm not doing that because that's something different, or hey, I'm not comfortable with that, baby, because my parents never talked. I didn't talk about my feelings. I'm not cool with that. Whether it's male or female, let's say, just for this example, let's say I'm a guy in a relationship that has just learned about or just read your book, and I want to practice this in my relationship.
Share that in a way that your partner doesn't get stubborn and close down around it. Yeah, that's the right question. Part of what is important is to learn to think in terms of what's good for the relationship, and which means you're willing to put up with a little bit of blowback when you really feel like you're on the right path in terms of this, we really need this, right? So it might be about something new you're going to learn together. It might be about something as simple as, we really need to stop raising our voices with each other. And the first time you introduce that idea, your partner might say, what do you mean? I'm not raising my voice. And part of what it takes when you feel like you're really onto something that you think is going to be good for your relationship, you have to be willing to come back to it over and over again. Often the first response is going to be a cautious one, or a fearful one, or an untrusting one even. Over time, though, if your willingness to not give up and to not get overly discouraged by getting the hand, it's like, okay, so your partner's entitled to have their skepticism. Maybe they're a little untrusting because you have been going through a hard time. The way you gain that trust back is to consistently be showing up in the place of, I want a better relationship with you. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Here's some things I've been thinking about. I heard this talk by Kathryn Ford the other day, and she was talking about being in the present moment and paying attention to openness. I'd really like to talk to you about that when it's the right time. That's the other thing, is allow your partner to pick the time. So instead of just springing it on her, like someday after dinner you say, tonight we're going to talk about open apertures, right? Instead, you say, I heard this talk the other day about relationships, and there were a couple ideas in there I'd like to discuss with you. Why don't you let me know when you'd be open to that? Or are you open to that? And she might say, well, maybe, but not now. And then you might say, yeah, I get that, not now. How about this Sunday we'll go for a walk and maybe we can talk about it then.
Love that.
Allow your partner to have some time to get used to the idea that you're going to introduce something new. We don't like things being sprung on us, even when they turn out to be good things. It's a little bit alarming. So, and especially when, partners should be having good ideas about the relationship. They should be thinking proactively about what would help us. How could we get to the next place where we're even better couple? On the other hand, we need some time to get used to what each other are introducing. You've been thinking about it, but she's just hearing about it. So don't get too discouraged if you get turned down the first 3 times you bring it up. You circle back again and say, I know that you didn't like that idea. Maybe I didn't express it very well. Let me say it a different way, because I still think it might be useful.
Well, how do guys, I know the one thing that I struggle with, right, is just, I guess, communicating, maybe not our feelings, but communicating that we understand where she's coming from. Just hearing her and then saying something that's going to be meaningful for her. And then maybe it's not even that, maybe it's just kind of just being there to listen. But it's I want to have a productive conversation with my wife about her feelings and how I can support her. Right. But sometimes it's man, we're just on 2 different worlds. I just feel maybe it's the old men are from, what is it, Mars or something like that, whatever that is. Just because we're different, totally different. I even talked to one lady who wrote a book about how men and women listen differently. We just are wired differently, right? How do we find common ground? That has been the biggest, perplexing thing is finding that common ground. Is it scheduling things and then taking turns communicating and then is it breaking it down to the fundamentals of communication?
A lot of it is. A lot of relationship building happens in communication. Human beings are very verbal. We're very into talking to each other. And in fact, part of the heavy lifting in the brain of integration of wiring things together happens with language. And part of the wiring of people together happens with language. So yeah, talking is really an important part of that. One of the keys there is there's so many things about being a couple that if you understand how normal they are and that they're not a sign that you're doing wrong, this is just something that's hard for couples. Then you avoid the discouragement of, oh boy, we must be really screwing this up because we're just constantly finding places where it's like we don't even live in the same world. When you come to understand that is actually what's pretty normal between couples, even couples that have been together a very long time, even couples that are doing very well, over and over again, they're in conversations where they can hardly believe that the other person is describing what they're describing because it doesn't look that way at all to the person listening. It's really important to learn the both and of coming together with your partner. In other words, it's not either or. The old story about the blind man and the elephant, and somebody says, so what is an elephant like? And one man is, holding at the tail, and he says, oh, an elephant is like a rope. And the other guy says, no, an elephant's like a tree trunk, and he's got his hands on the leg, right? It's exactly like that with couples. If you can learn to look for the perspective where you're both right, almost always that's not only the best perspective, it's actually the correct perspective, is that she's contributing something and you're contributing something, both of which are valuable. And if you avoid getting into the either or kind of debate, like one of us must be right and one of us must be wrong, because how could these two things both be true? if you can step back and assume both of these things are true, we just don't understand how yet. And then you start looking for, well, if both of these things are true, what are we looking at? What's the big picture here? And if you go looking for that together with the understanding that nobody's taking anything off the table, this is not going to be about who's right or wrong. This is going to be about a really interesting exploration of how in the world could it both be true that you think I'm a very impatient person and I think I'm very patient. How could both of those things be true? And then you go looking for, how does that work? And over again, I watch couples do this and they come up with really interesting things that they didn't already know. A really good conversation between two people is not just a drag and drop of who knows what, and then figuring out who's got the righter point of view. A really good conversation, people are discovering things as they're talking. And they're both and each discovering something that nobody brought in the door with them. And you start with what you already know and you kind of put that on the table. And then you start to sort through that together and look for, okay, what are the things we don't already know? And how can we make sense out of this by learning something new?
What if you find that you're in love with someone? And you were speaking about this and I was like, this is good stuff for some average couples. But what if you're the couple or the person in a relationship where you are learning about the person that you love or in love with, and they have some heavy duty trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that trauma? How do you work through that trauma with that person?
Yes. You're probably now edging up to the part where I'm going to say there is a role for therapists in the world. And right there is where it is. A lot of this stuff people can learn on their own. But as I said, I often think of myself as pretty analogous to a piano teacher. Yeah, you can kind of figure out some of this on your own, but not as quickly and not as easily as if you have a coach. And especially if you're in a couple and you feel like either part of what happens once you're in a committed relationship is you do start to discover things not only about the other person, but also about yourself that you didn't know. It's part of what's so uncomfortable is suddenly you're confronted with pieces of even your own self that you didn't quite know that was there until you suddenly kind of hit a wall with what you're trying to do with your partner. Likewise, you may both find out things about your partner that you didn't know, or that they did know, and it's starting to be revealed. Rule of thumb is, have a couple of goes at it on your own. Obviously, sympathetic, listening, understanding, talking, and also encouraging trust. Look, I really care about you. I'm interested in what's going on. I am a little concerned that you're as distressed as you are when XYZ happens. I know that there may be some stories there. I'd be interested if you want to share them. So you invite confidence, you invite sharing, but also it's very important to know when it's time to call the coach, and not to be stubborn about that, because what can happen is you use up all your cycles of goodwill, getting more and more stuck with something, and you start to get discouraged and feel like this is hopeless. And often or occasionally or some of the time, it happens that couples come apart because they didn't go soon enough for help when they didn't actually have to. That's one of the most distressing situations that I come upon in my work, is seeing a couple where I talk to them for a while. They're clearly coming in because they are coming apart and they're really coming in for counseling about the separation. But when I talk to them, I realize there's nothing inherently wrong with either one of them or in their partnership that meant that this relationship had to end. They just went on too long trying to make a go of it by themselves without getting help, and they burned all their bridges. And they accumulated too many bad feelings and too much discouragement, and now they're too discouraged to keep trying. And so what you want is not to end up going to the expert when you really you're done. You want to go in early, and that's one of the things I said I like about seeing younger people is they come in earlier. They're not so proud or stubborn or whatever it is about seeking these kinds of services. and they kind of understand, wow, if we can find somebody that knows a little bit more about this than we do. And that goes back to that thing of being a couple is kind of a very private thing. We don't easily learn from other couples about this. So often we need to go to somebody. It's almost like in a certain way, I'm the middle person, you know. I spend my day listening to couples talk. So I know a lot about what's going on inside couples. If you come to see me, I can tell you something about that you might have to have a lot of dinner parties to learn otherwise, right?
Yeah, you gotta go out there, and I like that idea, right? Like going out there and seeing what other couples are doing and knowing that they're struggling with the same things that you are. Speaking of what you're just talking about, right? Like you're seeing couples that come in that are just a little bit too late in their relationship. Like, do you think we have a high divorce rate because we give up too easily?
Yeah, that's a really important and complicated question. So I'm probably not going to settle for one answer to that. I think that's part of it. Partly we give up too easily because, you know, a lot of us have lived lives that have taught us that things should come easily to us. This thing about thinking that we also think we're supposed to already know things that in fact we're supposed to be learning throughout our lifetimes. And so we give up too easily because we think it should be easier than it is. So there must be something wrong with either me or you or this relationship because it shouldn't be this hard. And no, actually being a couple is pretty challenging. It's very rewarding. So it's sort of like one of those high stakes things in life. There's lots of things in life that are really, really hard, but also really, really rewarding. I think you have kids, right?
Oh yeah, I got a boatload. I got 3.
Yeah. So having kids, so being a parent is like that also. The prices that you end up paying for being a parent are way more than you ever thought that they would be. And they continue to be, but also the rewards are stronger. And so there are a lot of places in life that you can place yourself where it's going to be really hard and also the rewards are big. So one of the reasons for divorce is that people have a romantic misunderstanding about what being in a relationship is. And it goes back to that thing I said, you have to add the learning back in. It can't, being in a solid relationship can be all of those things if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and do the learning. So that's part of it, is that people don't really understand that. Part of it is giving up too easily. And
think about it, right? Society is programming us, right? Like through like, you know, the movies, you know, the Cinderella stories, everything is perfect. And, you know, sometimes, you know, hanging out with some people at a dinner party might not be the best thing because they're saying to you that you should be this. I mean, our families are already doing that at a young age of programming you that you have to be like this, that we don't talk about our feelings. Right. So, I mean, we're on a losing battle before we even get into the marriage sometimes because we think that, oh, well, marriage should be this because Walt Disney said in all of his movies that there's going to be a happily ever after. And this is work. You know, this is work.
It's work. And we think that it's all about finding the right person. This goes back to our talking about the early stages versus the later stages. There's been way too much emphasis on how do you find the right person. It is important to have some skills for finding the right person. It is possible to end up with the wrong person. But by and large, we've overemphasized finding the right person as if we're done. You know, oh, great. How great. I found the right person. I'm set, right? No. That was just step one. Step two is all the learning that you're going to do with this person. And that's what you're signing up for if you're in it for the long haul. And if you're not signing up for that, it's probably not going to go well. So it's not just about who you choose. It's about all the other choices you make as you start to learn together and as you start to hit the problems. I often tell people the difference between a couple that's failing and a couple that's thriving is knowing how to turn the problems into learning. And when you figure that part out, then it starts to get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more fun. The other thing about the divorce rate, I think also is that contrary to maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, when being a couple was still a lot about physical survival, it rarely is anymore. Society has reconfigured itself, and our lives have reconfigured themselves so that we don't really physically need to be with somebody to survive. And we expect other things, therefore, friendship, knowing each other well, being intimate. And those things are a lot more complicated than just figuring out how to get the cows milked and how to get the wheat in from the field. So we're actually setting the bar often pretty high. And I would say there's nothing wrong with setting the bar high. Just know that that's what you're aiming at, and you're going to keep walking toward that goal.
I love that. And another thing that thrives in creating love is experiences, right? Like you talked about kids. Like going through that process with my wife was such a love builder, where like you see that person, you see what they go through, you experience it together as an experience. You're creating life. I mean, all of that is like, and even like, just going on trips and just being around. Like we just went to the Keys not too long ago. We didn't kill each other and traveling down there. So that was a positive experience. So
that's a win right there.
Kathryn Ford, this has been amazing. I love this conversation. I love your work. How can people find out more about you?
The main way they can find out more about me is to go to my website, which is kathrynfordmd.com. I also do a lot of my teaching through Stanford Continuing Studies. So they can also go to the Stanford Continuing Studies website and look for my courses there's a section called Professional and Personal Development, and my courses are usually listed there.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Lastly, last question, kind of big. What do you want your legacy to be?
That's exactly the right question right now, because part of why I'm talking to people like you, part of why I wrote a book, is I realized that I had accomplished a whole lot of what I wanted with my work, especially the part about learning how to do it better. But doing clinical practice, it's a very small number of people that get to benefit by what I've spent 20 years studying and learning. And at a certain point, I got impatient to share that with more people. So what I want my legacy to be is that all the things that I have learned from working with couples get passed on a little bit more broadly, as you're helping me do today.
Oh, I love it. I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for joining the show and speaking to this audience about being in the moment.
Thank you, Trey. This was great.